Hello everybody, and welcome to the Everfree Network review of My Little Pony, Friendship is Magic, Season 4, Episode 6, Power Ponies. I'm Final Draft, and I'm here today with Crescendo.
Hey there.
How are you doing, Crescendo?
I'm doing pretty good. Yourself?
I'm doing pretty good as well. But we've got a new reviewer with us today, EFN staff artist, Kibbie.
Hey, what's up?
Kibbie, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good.
Well, fantastic. Well, let's get right into it. Power Ponies. This is kind of an interesting episode. We begin this episode with Spike reading a comic book. Something new to the series. I thought that's actually kind of interesting. And Twilight treating him like a kid. And Kibbie, you were talking about this before we started recording.
Yeah, I really like the beginning because, it's just that little reminder that Spike isn't grown up and Twilight's trying to tell Spike that he needs to be in bed because it's late. And, it's like she's kind of being like Spike's mom almost. And it's something we normally don't see.
Even though we don't see him much, this is the dynamic of Spike and Twilight's relationship. She's been there for him since he was born, so in essence, she is like his mother.
Well, she kind of did bring him out of the egg or whatever back in Magic Kindergarten or wherever you put that in your own headcanon timeline. So in a sense, she's kind of the mom figure for Spike. But at the same rate, I think what makes this opening scene most interesting is that Spike is a comic book nerd. And I think a few of us can relate to that.
Oh yeah, definitely. Staying up past midnight reading the newest manga or whatever that just came out the past week. Yep, that was me in middle school all the time.
Sadly, I can't relate to this, but when they do an episode on video games, I'm right there.
Give it time. Just give it time. So quickly into the episode, Spike and the main six are back at the princess's castle, and they're trying to fix it up and spruce it up. They're adjusting paintings. Pinkie Pie is doing her standard gravity-defying behavior. And Spike is finding himself feeling useless, which I thought was kind of weird. Twilight's telling him to go to bed and get enough sleep so he can help out. They get to the castle, it's kind of like, no, don't worry about it. Go read your comic.
I think it's more a fact of they thought maybe if there was a job that he could do, that he'd be prepared for it, and if not, then he's just free to do what he wants.
It almost reminds me of like the situation where it's like someone's like little brother that's around that the big brother and big sister, they don't want him to be interfering with anything because they think he might mess it up. That's almost the feeling that I got during this episode.
It's kind of like in the episode Sisterhood Social, where Rarity is basically telling Sweetieville, buzz off, don't help out. Well, Spike goes and finds a reclusive corner of the library of the Pony's new clubhouse, which actually, as an aside, I think it's interesting that they keep bringing this castle back during the course of the season, and that, Kibbie, you had noticed this too when we were reviewing the episode before we started recording, that they keep the damage marks and everything else consistent between the episodes.
Yeah, definitely. If you go back and if you look at the episode, right when Luna like stomps on the ground and like cracks the wall in the background, like even like the way the hole looks in the wall, it's almost exactly the same. So they've really kept that kind of on track in this during this season. You can even go back to the episode, the earlier one where they were in the castle and Twilight was trying to figure out about Celestia and Luna's past as well. It's the same way in that episode too.
It's definitely great, and something we can all appreciate is the continuity of this series.
They're giving a lot more attention to that kind of background, historical, but architectural detail than they have in past seasons, I think. I think the idea of the Ponies using an entire ancient, important castle as just like a clubhouse is kind of funny to me, but anyway, Spike finds a secluded corner of the castle's library to finish his comic, and he's surprised to find that the last page is blank. And there's an indiscernible scribble, which he quickly deciphers, that says, "You can return to the place you started when the Maniac is defeated." Next thing you know, in almost an Equestria Girls type situation, Spike and all of the main six get sucked into a comic book. Well, Pinkie Pie jumps in, but that's just what she would do anyway.
Yeah, I really found it funny that instead, in this time, it's Twilight chasing after Spike, unlike in Equestria Girls.
Well, I found it weird that they made an entire episode premise out of them getting sucked into another dimension. I mean, how many different dimensions are there to Equestria? I mean, are there other weird realms that we're going to find out about later?
Well, I'm not so sure it's another dimension, considering at the end of the episode, Spike says he got it from the enchanted comic book store, which means, it's just an enchantment. Maybe it was a shared illusion or something along that line.
It's a hell of a shared illusion.
I mean, it's just like how in the season opener where Twilight drank that special potion and she was able to somehow be in the past. It could have been something like that, too. You never know.
Yeah.
The walls of reality in My Little Pony slowly, one by one, crumble. But anyway, well, they end up in Metropolis, and Robin, Spike, notices that all of the ponies are now dressed as his favorite characters, the Power Ponies. I thought the names of the ponies were a little bit weird. Like, I didn't really think that Saddle Rage was a really epic power pony name for basically Flutter Hulk.
And Zap is so creative.
Dash, you're Zap! That's a weird line out of context. But anyway, they each have their own powers, and they each fail to use them, as this episode's villain is revealed, the Maniac, who to me looks like a hybrid between Venom and Doc Ock from Spider-Man.
With a little bit of Joker thrown in.
Yeah, the origin story that she fell into a vat of shampoo chemicals and came out crazy and multicolored. I mean, that's pretty much spot on for the Joker's origin story.
Apparently, when you fall into a giant pool of hairspray, you turn into a Medusa pony.
See, this is why you need railings around any kind of vat, because they always lead to superpowers or supervillains.
It is a bit irresponsible, I suppose. I like the character's design, though. I think it's really cool how the animators worked with her hair to make them prehensile, to make them act as legs or as, ropes or whatever they needed for the episode. I really enjoyed the character overall.
Yeah, it was very inventive design, and in fact, despite being only a singular episode, non-starting of the series and non-finale villain, she was actually one of my favorites.
Well, the Maniac is voiced by Ellen Kennedy, and I think she does an incredible job. I think she steals the show this episode. She's perfectly evil. She's perfectly crazy. The voice just fits the character overall. I mean, what'd you guys think?
I wholeheartedly agree there. Again, she's one of my favorite villains, and the voice acting complements that to a T.
One of the things that I liked about her was just that evil classic villain laugh that you'd hear in the old Batman cartoons or the old Spider-Man cartoons.
Well, and the storyline is such a classic comic book storyline. The villains breaking into the museum to steal the gem to power the Doomsday device. I mean, you can't get more stereotypical than that.
But this is a show that can and does thrive on cliches, and it does it well.
Indeed. Well, again, the ponies absolutely fail to use their newfound powers. Twilight manages to somehow not shoot a beam of ice. Fluttershy, of course, doesn't get angry and turn into the Hulk, Saddle Rage.
Pinkie Pie runs off to some bakery that's probably 500 miles away.
Which I liked how her contrails, or whatever you want to call the pink flash behind her, looked like the light cycle trails from Tron. I mean, they were at right angles and all that. And she spends most of the episode just kind of going and getting baked goods and then joining the action when she has to. Applejack, her character, has a psychically linked rope, which, I don't know. The design of the character, and then she gets wrapped up really quick. She's a background character, so I really shouldn't look into it.
I've actually heard a couple of people talking about who they compare to in real life comic book heroes. For instance, Rainbow Dash would relate to Storm from the X-Men, and Fluttershy is obviously the Hulk. We've been racking our minds trying to think who Twilight and AJ would actually be.
One of the things that I've just been thinking of is because of the magical rope. I think it was Wonder Woman who used to have a rope like that too.
She did. She had the magical rope, and I guess the invisible plane doesn't make an appearance in this one. But
can ponies even fly a plane?
What it would have been to see Applejack just floating through the air.
That would have been kind of funny. Now, Twilight's character is, in a sense, I mean, her powers are just the same as her regular powers, right? You can shoot beams of energy from your horn. That's basically what she could do anyway. So I don't really know what the super portion of her powers was in that case.
I mean, it's almost just like what happened with Applejack too. Her special power is she's able to toss a rope and tie it against a light bulb. I don't think that's something we would normally see in the regular version of the show.
And to be honest, I wouldn't be surprised if Pinkie Pie could achieve what she did in this episode in the normal show.
I mean, this is one of those things that you do have to take in consideration. You do have to remember some of the things they've already done in the past in the show. So in ways, they're already kind of like superheroes. It's just this is adding a little more extra to what they can normally do, in my opinion.
Well, I think that the best match of powers and character in this episode by far is Rarity as Radiance. She's basically like the Green Lantern. She can materialize objects and whatever she thinks of, but she uses it in such a Rarity sort of way. I got a real kick out of it where she's creating a tea set when she's sucked up in a tornado. What other character would do that?
Yeah, in my opinion, Rarity was easily the best source of humor for this episode. I mean, throughout the whole episode, you just see her creating items that relate to her, and yet, as you go through, they become increasingly useful. For instance, when she first tries out her powers, she just summons a tea set, like you say, which is kind of useless in a tornado. But later we get the little plate and glass thing that protects her from the tornado, a nail file that can file through the prison bars and steps down from the prison bar, etc.
Yeah, she learns at least to start creating useful objects to fight the goons. But anyway, Spike, though, is the designated character Humdrum. I guess a background character in the comic book that he was reading that mostly gets in the way in his comic relief. I felt kind of bad for poor Spike, because I think he was already, in a sense, projecting himself on that character before they got sucked into the comic book. And then throughout the episode, I mean, he goes into the situation already feeling worthless.
It's like his bad dream or nightmare kind of just came true inside the comic book.
It's like his fan fiction came true and it turned out for the worst for him.
Well, if you're feeling a certain way, sometimes it will lead credence to you acting a certain way, and I definitely don't think him feeling, worthless would have helped in his role as Humdrum.
Well, while we are on the topic of the Power Ponies as such, their costumes. I don't know about you guys. The second I started seeing the costumes, the first thing that came to mind is, okay, here is a whole new feast of designs for cosplayers. I fully expect to see people at conventions dressed as these characters.
The first thing that popped up in my mind as soon as I saw the costumes, I just had these very powerful memories of watching the Power Rangers when I was 5 years old start popping up in my head, and all I could hear when I saw the costumes was just the Power Rangers theme song playing in the background.
I watched Power Rangers when I was a kid, and I have to say, this episode and the characters, they aren't like the Power Rangers. I mean, they're called the Power Ponies, but they don't act like the Power Rangers. They're not a group of, punk teenagers that are helping out at the local kickboxing center or whatever, that suddenly a monster is sent down from the moon that they have to fight in an abandoned warehouse.
I think it was probably just due to the fact that they're called the Power Ponies, and then, just kind of some of the catchphrases that were said throughout the episode. It just reminded me of a lot of what you'd hear in a Power Rangers episode, where they were always trying to, tie in the Power Rangers name into something catchy.
It's just a shame we didn't get any giant robots, huh?
Give it time.
Or that invisible plane.
You really want that to happen, don't you?
I could dream of Applejack flying in an invisible plane one day.
You could also do artwork of it. Her character's name is Mistress Marvelous, and doing some quick, shameless Google searching reminds me that her costume style is very similar to Miss Marvel's, a somewhat lesser-known superhero, but the powers are different, and you probably don't care either way because Miss Marvel doesn't have an invisible airplane. Well, anyway, the Ponies then decide they're going to attack Maniac's base of operations, a shampoo factory with a pretty cool neon sign, in my opinion. But anyway, Rainbow Dash in standard fashion immediately attacks, and they all once again flunk.
So what you're saying is she dashed right in?
She did. I got a kick out of Twilight basically saying, well, so much for the element of surprise. Seems like this entire season, all of her planning is just being foiled by her friend's impatience.
I mean, Rainbow Dash just wanted to sneak up on them with the element of thunder.
Again, they fail, and they are all frozen by the Maniac's hairspray bottle. Shameless but funny, I'll give them that. And Maniac decides not to waste any of the hairspray on poor little humdrum Spike. And that's so pathetic. I mean, he's clearly there to try and defeat her, but she just views him as nothing. Nope, don't even have to freeze him, he's worthless.
It's like I said earlier, the show does thrive on cliches, and this is one of the biggest cliches of them all. Is the villain thinking, oh, they've captured the superhero, they don't need the sidekick to be captured, they're worthless, and they can't do anything. It is one of the biggest cliches in, like, movies and TV.
I did like that the artists made a point of making the henchmen, or hench ponies, or whatever the term is, look as stylish as possible.
Yeah, I couldn't stop laughing when the one henchman pony got zapped, and the only thing he was freaking out about was the fact that his mane got messed up.
My hair!
I mean, the only thing that reminded me of when he said that was when you go all the way back to the first 2 episodes with Stephen Magnet freaking out about his mustache. That's the only thing that I could remember as soon as I heard that.
It would not surprise me in the least if the same voice actor, Lee Tokar, did both voices. Well, he did Stephen Magnet's, but I would not be surprised if he did a background voice or two in this episode. You hear a lot of fun little background things, too. There's a Wilhelm scream in the episode. That's always classic.
We've had how many this season now? I know we had one in Daring Don't.
I think we need to have one every episode for whatever reason they can come up with. It's just funny. Well, Spike sneaks around and falls through a vent and gets up on the catwalk and sees that the Maniac is about to unleash her doomsday weapon upon the citizens of Metropolis, turning all of their hair crazy. As far as evil plans go, that one's not so evil in my opinion. It's just stupid, I think. I mean, that doesn't really feel to me like something that a villain would do. That seems to me more like someone who wants to create a minor annoyance. That's what they would do.
My evil plan to take over the world is to ruin everyone's manes on the entire planet.
Maybe, but I think it will lead to a hairy situation.
Speaking of terrible puns, I am very disappointed with the writing crew of this episode for not making use of the obvious pun for this episode, which is Bad Hair Day. They had so many opportunities. I mean, the Maniac could have said it to them at any point throughout the episode. When they finally defeat her at the end of the episode, the Power Ponies could have said to her, I guess today was just a bad hair day for you, or something like that. Why didn't they use it? It just blows my mind that they didn't use that obvious pun. As a pun aficionado, I have to object. I'm upset.
I would have imagined that Pinkie Pie probably would have said that if the joke was said.
Also, as a pun aficionado and a Brit, I will be writing a very stern letter.
And then filing it away in my cigar box as I sit and contemplate the situation while eating some digestive biscuits.
I do believe you mean jewelry box. We don't have cigars.
Brits don't have cigars? Churchill? Hello?
Not real.
Anyway. Well, the ponies are freed by Spike, who realizes that he isn't Humdrum and that he did save the Crystal Empire. As Kibbie pointed out to me. He gets his courage or what have you and throws a hook at what looks to me like DJ Midley's OC, freeing the ponies, and the Power Ponies go and quickly scoop up the hench ponies, and Maniac, in typical Twilight Zone fashion, gets zapped by her own gigantic hairdryer, gets wrapped up in her own tendrils. The ponies are ejected back into the real world, and then Pinkie Pie does what Pinkie Pie does best, and somehow serves cupcakes from another dimension to everybody.
See, I think this was a subtle joke here that she actually managed to break the fourth wall of the comic and bring something out of the comic world.
Honestly, it amazes me that they find new ways for Pinkie Pie to break the rules of reality. And they found a new way in this episode, and I gotta give them credit for that.
There's never any rules for her. There is a rule just expected to be broken with her. Now, Draft, you're forgetting right during the part where she's about to fire her hairdry cannon thing at the ponies, that a little tiny firefly with bulging eyes that I could imagine would probably be seen in like a horror movie or something. I can't get over how big the eyes are on it. This little firefly jumps in front of the ray gun and she flicks it out of the way, and this pretty much makes Fluttershy snap during the episode.
Which is a good point to make, because it was revealed early on that Fluttershy's character, Saddle Rage, only becomes superpowered when she's enraged. And they could have trolled us all, the writers of this episode, and not have her go Hulk mode. Can you imagine if she did not go Hulk mode in this episode, what the reaction online would have been?
People probably would have flipped out.
They would have been so mad. The internet would have gone Hulk mode over it. But no, yeah, Fluttershy does go Hulk mode, and it's awkward.
This is something I have a point to make about, though, is she doesn't get mad at her friends getting hurt. She doesn't get mad at the prospect of the whole city being hurt by crazy hair somehow. But no, she gets mad at a tiny fly getting hurt. I mean, I know it's in Fluttershy's character to care about animals and the likes, but what about her friends?
One of the things, that I was thinking about as soon as Fluttershy started turning into Hulk mode is the fact that I really want to see someone cosplay as Snowflake cosplaying as Fluttershy's character in this episode.
That's a brilliant idea.
I mean, it has to be done now.
And there is the definitive Snowflake cosplayer out there. Private Stampede, if you're listening, do this because it's brilliant.
Yeah, definitely. Private Stampede, whenever I see you around at another convention again, I better see you cosplaying as this. It's too perfect.
It really is. Actually, the design really reminded me of Snowflake. It's just ridiculous. Over the top.
And then just at the end where she looks at all of her friends as she's just destroying the giant weapon, that's when you go back to the moment to realize, oh, it's still Fluttershy, because she kind of blushes and she's like, oh, sorry.
I thought she would have depowered or, become back normal mode, whatever the term for it is. But you don't see that before they all get sucked out of the comic. And how funny would that be if she came back into the castle as Flutter Hulk? That would be amusing to me, at least. Well, so overall, looking at the themes of the episode, this is My Little Pony trying to break a little bit of new ground, I think. They're taking the characters and putting them in a more adventure-based circumstance. For the first 3 seasons, there were a lot of character episodes where you see one character really struggle with their flaws. And you could argue that Spike does that a little bit in this episode. But this is much more of an adventure sort of thing, where they're sucked into basically a campaign, and they have to overcome a villain to finish things. And I thought that was an interesting shift that has been occurring over the course of season 4 as opposed to the first 3 seasons.
Well, I think it's mainly in part due to the fact that we have had so many characterizations episodes. We know how the characters are going to react to certain circumstance. Now it's time to put them out of the familiar circumstance and into circumstance we don't know how they'll react to.
As someone who does make fan art of the show, and a lot of fan art, one of the things that I have noticed is now that they're starting to gear away towards building more so on the backgrounds of the characters, they're really starting to make the actual background of the show itself evolve. Like in this episode, this is the first time where we've really seen an actual somewhat modern city in the show. I mean, most of the cities that you see in Equestria, they look like they're from medieval times almost, where there's no electricity or anything. In this one, it looks like you're looking at New York or something.
And that's something, too, that when Lauren first conceived of the show, that she wanted it to be more of that kind of medieval fantasy type realm sort of thing, that it wasn't going to be modern technology everywhere. At the same rate, though, this episode, the ponies didn't rely on technology to, defeat the Maniac.
Within this episode, though, you could see the elements of modern technology, like with the street lights, with the neon sign. You could tell that this isn't like a city that's from medieval times.
Yeah, it is definitely different.
No, this begs the question, was it based on a real city in Equestria, or is it just an artist's rendition?
I think that Metropolis is a version of Metropolis from DC Comics, and Metropolis is a version of New York, and that the version of New York in Equestria is Manhattan, which an upcoming episode is going to feature. And I am now officially a nerd.
Just now?
You thought of the prequel to the sequel.
I did. One thing I noticed about the episode is they could have used this to make a lot more blatant comic book references that they didn't do. The characters could have been a lot more... I mean, with the exception of Fluttershy, who's, Saddle Rage is obviously the Hulk. The rest of them don't necessarily equate to real-world comic books, if that makes sense. We don't have a Superman character in this episode. We don't have a Batman character. They're just powered ponies.
One element that I thought this episode was missing a lot of, actually, was something that you see in like the average American comic book, is the fact that there were no, I believe they're called onomatopoeias, where it's like the giant like pow text pops up on the screen when someone gets punched.
I wonder if they had considered doing that for the episode.
It's one of the things that, I was almost expecting, but after getting to the end, I realized it never happened.
That would have been a cool element if they had done that, because they're in a comic book. That would have been neat if they had changed things up. But I imagine that would have been a nightmare for the storyboarders.
Yeah, and really the only other comic book element that I noticed that wasn't really there was actually the halftone style of art, where you see it's just like, like a bunch of like dots compiled together to make like, certain colors. Like shadows would be like a bunch of black dots that are kind of spread apart a little bit.
Yeah, like pop art.
Mm-hmm.
Well, okay, so looking holistically at this episode, and I also think it's somewhat telling that we really haven't gone into much detail about the moral of the episode that they tell at the end, believe in yourself, even, Yeah, it felt to me that the moral element of the episode was really lacking, that really this was just a fun romp, as it were. Like, there was no real purpose for them to be in the comic book world. It was just more or less an excuse to get them there.
Well, I don't think every episode needs to have a moral to it in the end, honestly.
I mean, it is one of those reiterating things again, where Spike does say at the end of the episode, you don't need to have superpowers to be a super friend. And that is one of the things that does happen in the episode, kind of, which is like what's expected. The main six kind of comes together and they help someone else out as friends.
That's true. But I guess my point is that another difference between this episode and many of the ones you see in seasons 1 through 3 is that it doesn't really push the morality in this case, whereas a lot of the other episodes, that was a heavier element.
It is one of those things to be expected now that Twilight did actually get a pair of wings finally, is the fact that they're not necessarily writing letters to Celestia anymore. It's really exploring just some of the stories and adventures they might have.
And that brings up an interesting point I almost forgot to mention, which is that one complaint I have read and heard about season 4 is that Twilight, now that she's a princess, is acting bossier than she used to. That she's changed her dynamic towards the other ponies. And I felt like in this episode, she wasn't bossing anyone around.
Yeah, that is an opinion I actually hold to some degree. And I will say it's nice to see her, just being on the same level again.
During a lot of the fighting scenes, too, like, even though, like, yeah, during some of the scenes, Twilight may have been standing in front of all the other characters, during the fighting scenes, you really don't see her doing a lot of the work. You see Applejack and Rainbow Dash doing a lot of the work, too.
I think in that case, though, it's more those two other ponies who were, like, the most headstrong, the most used to situations like this.
It's true.
Applejack is used to being in the background. Not kidding.
As Applejack fans cry everywhere.
I'm kidding. She's not number 6. Fluttershy is. But anyway, the hate mail will start rolling, and no, I'm joking around. Okay, so looking holistically at this episode, looking at the episode as a whole, out of 5 enchanting comic books, what rating would you give this episode, Crescendo?
I think I'm gonna have to go with a 4.5 Enchanted Comic Books out of 5. It's one of the strongest episodes of season 4, I'd have to say. The humor was amazing. Rarity stole the show from me in that aspect. The writing was all around good, and as we spoke earlier in this episode review, the continuity with like the castle and just the whole episode had a feel-good thing to it at the end as well, with everyone happy to see Spike, and the speech Twilight gave for him at the end when she was stuck in the cage. So yeah, I'm gonna have to give it a 4.5 out of 5.
And Kibbie, what is your opinion of this episode?
I would have to give it 4 enchanted fanfics out of 5. Mostly because of the fact that there wasn't any of that classic like pop-up text that you see during the action scene. That kind of, I was really missing that part, wishing it was in there. But overall, I mean, yeah, there is a lot of the continuation of the overarching storyline with what you see in the castle. The certain damage is still there from the first 2 episodes. And it was really hilarious, in my opinion, to see Pinkie Pie running around and messing with some of the villains with their super speed powers.
How about you, Draft?
I would actually have to give this only 3.5 enchanted fanfics out of 5, because what I love the most about My Little Pony is the unexpected elements of it. The depth you didn't anticipate to be there. And I felt like this episode in that sense was kind of shallow. The characters were all great. The voice acting was amazing. And I'm giving it actually a half fanfic more than I would have usually. Ellen Kennedy did an incredible job as the Maniac. I think that she stole the show by far. Her voice acting was amazing. The design of the Maniac was also really well done. I'm hoping they find some excuse to bring that villain back, because I think she would make a really good recurring villain for the show in general. But anyway, I felt like, yeah, it's kept continuity. It brought the ponies somewhere new, and it was kind of like a popcorn episode, but it didn't have the depth or the oomph that I look for in an episode like, say, Lesson Zero or Party of One, or even Return of Harmony or Sonic Rainbow. It just didn't have those unanticipated elements that make you sit back and go, wow, they did that. It just felt like a solid, enjoyable episode that, I'm not going to criticize harshly, but at the same rate, I wouldn't give it more than 3.5. Okay, everybody, thanks for tuning in to our episode review of Power Ponies. Once again, I'm Final Draft.
I'm Crescendo.
And I'm Kibbie the Great.
Kibbles, please. And tune in next week for another episode review.